The roadmap for Africa's energy transition remains high on the agenda of security, business development and investment. Some analysts say while South Africa is currently the most advanced in this regard, there's broader potential for the entire continent to achieve clean and sustainable energy. This is said to be advantageous in attracting foreign investors. Absa's head of natural resources and energy, Shirley speaks to us about this. Thank you so much for your time, Shirley. An interesting debate to be had in 2023 amid an energy crisis. Where do we stand in terms of plans towards a sustainable energy plan that also speaks to a move towards the just transition?
Thank you, Tumisang. I think we all understand that the energy transition will actually take a bit of time, but in South Africa specifically, there is a few, actually quite a number of viable energy projects, that's currently happening. When our government introduced the Integrated Resource Plan in 2019, it was definitely the intention to put about 30 gigs of new energy generation into the system. And with the IPP programs, bid windows 1 to 6, that's been announced, and many of those being implemented, we're on the road to getting there. I think one thing that's definitely hampered our progress was really the transmission and distribution networks specifically. So there's work to be done in that instance.
Now, this work, of course, Shirley, is not going to take place overnight. Do we have the right tools as well as regulation that is being put in place to ensure that there is a conducive environment for growth in this area?
On the transmission and distribution specifically, to me, I think there is going to be a need for private investors coming in, definitely. I don't think it's something that the government can do on its own. And in the same way as generation has been opened, for example, to the mining industry, where we've seen about 89 projects coming on, that's in progress, to make sure that there's pressure taken off the grid, for example. So private investment is going to be very important. And we've seen in many of the other African countries as well that private investors are actually wanting to come in, like, for example, in Egypt. But policy clarity and clear rules and regulations must be in place.
And what exactly are investors looking for when it comes to that certainty of policy, regulation, and a roadmap of sorts?
I think the first point is obviously the monetary and fiscal policy. I think political stability is very important, for us as well as any African country that we are looking at. Ultimately, we've seen more and more the ESG is going to be part of it. So capital will follow sustainability, but there's so many factors that all of our African countries need to take into consideration to make sure it's a stable transition, and not forgetting any one part of the ESG abbreviation.
And speaking of ESG, I think it has now become one of those tools that are likely to change the dynamics of businesses going forward. I'm interested in finding out whether this is not a tool that investors maybe could be using to force companies as well as countries on the African continent to change course and maybe accelerate their pace of getting towards this just energy transition, irrespective of the challenges that are not similar to the rest of the globe.
I think Africa is very unique in that, we believe it cannot just happen overnight. It will be gradual. I think like our continent, for example, very abundant in a lot of natural resources, for example, on the battery mineral side, especially in Tanzania, and the DRC on cobalt, and so we can talk about lithium in many of the other African countries. I think there's going to be a balance where we need to ensure that we also market and put a proper investment criteria out there to make sure we get investors there So it's not just, on the energy side, but also on the inputs into the energy transition that we actually focus on. Africa, I think, is very unique. It's different than the rest of the world. And we've seen again with the war breaking out how quickly things change.
Lastly, Shirley, I think we must also talk about the importance of localization when it comes to energy solutions on the African continent. How vital does that become? Because outside of just enticing global investors, we need to look at what is produced on home soil.
A critical component, Tumisang, in the actual development of people's skills, the growth of the economy. We need to make sure that local content rules and regulations is not just implemented, but there's the ability and the capabilities put in place to put in, for example, manufacturing plants, making sure that kids out of varsity get learnerships, to learn those skills, etc. If we can't do this without manufacturing, beneficiation, etc., and we've seen in the mining industry as well, that beneficiation is actually quite needed. A critical component to me.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Shirley Weber is with Absa. They're talking to us this morning on the business desk about the opportunities that exist in finding energy solutions that are alternative to the current